Seconds. Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, we are Yud Aleph from the Beis, about 8 lines up from the bottom, the 2 dots. Okay, so the Gemara there is quoting the last line of the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, on Yud Aleph and Aleph, Zeh HaKlal, Kol Shu Mekabel Tumah, Ve'ein Gidula Min Haaretz. Anything which has the ability to become tummy, to become impure, or does not grow from the ground, ein mesachechin bo, you can't use it for schach. Kol davar she'eino mekabel tumah, but anything which does not have the ability to become tummy and gidula min haaretz and grows from the ground, mesachechin bo, a person could use it as schach. Okay, so that's the definition the Mishnah told us of what's kosher for schach. It needs to be 2 things. Number 1, it can't have the ability to be mekabel tumah. Number 2, it needs to grow from the ground. So the Gemara we have is going to try to figure out what was the source. In the Torah, what was the source for that rule? So the Gemara says, Minani Mili. How did the Mishnah know that to be kosher for schach, it needs to grow from the ground and not be able to be mekabel tumah? Amar Reish Lakish, Amar Krav, Eid Yala Min Haaretz. The pasuk says that Eid, which means the cloud, came up from the ground, which means it's saying a part of a cloud comes from the ground. So ma eid davar she'ena mekabel tumah v'gidula min haaretz. If an eid, a cloud, is something which cannot be mekabel tumah and grows from the ground, af sukkah davar she'ena mekabel tumah v'gidula min haaretz. So to sukkah, which the Gemara is going to bring this in a second, which is a zecher, remembering the ananei hakavod, right, the clouds which HaKadosh Baruch Hu surrounded Klal Yisroel in the Midbar. So if by a cloud, the pasuk tells us it's yalim in art, it comes from the ground, and we know a cloud's not mekabel tumah, so we see both characteristics in a cloud. And Sukkah is a zecher to the ananei hakavod, the clouds which surrounded Klal Yisroel. So we can learn from there to have those 2 rules, that it needs to grow from the ground, it needs to come up from the ground, and not be able to be mekabel tumah. Says the Gemara, Hanicha lamanda amar ananei kavod hayu. That makes sense according to the opinion that what we're celebrating on Sukkot is the ananei hakavod. Elamanda amar Sukkot mamish asu lahem ma'ika l'meimar. But according to the opinion that when the pasuk says you should sit in the sukkah l'man yedu d'raseichem, so that your children, the generations, should know kiba sukkos hoshavti es bnei Yisrael, because I put Klal Yisrael in sukkos b'otzios ha'meretz Mitzrayim, when I took them out of Mitzrayim. So what does it mean? Because I put them in sukkos. So one opinion says it means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu put us in the ananei hakavod, which was the supernatural free rent, which basically took care of Klal Yisrael's needs. Okay, it protected them from the surroundings in the Midbar. Right? We have different chazals of cleaned their clothes and smoothed out the road. It was a supernatural event. So one Mandamar says that's what we're commemorating with Sukkot. The other Mandamar says that it means Sukkot mamish, they had huts. The Tanya, because we learned in a brisa the following machlokas. Kiba Sukkot Shafti Yisbnei Yisrael. When the pasuk says, "I put Klal Yisrael in Sukkot," anani kavod hayid Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer's opinion is that it's the anani hakavod. Rabbi Kiva Omer Sukkot mamish asu lahem. Rabbi Kiva says that it was natural huts. So the Gemara says, "Hanicha Rabbi Eliezer." You're trying to learn what's the source in the Mishnah that the definition of schach needs to be 2 things: grow from the ground and not be able to be mekabel tumah. So the Gemara said the source is that a cloud, the pasuk says, is yalim min haaretz, comes from the ground. And a cloud is not mekabel tumah, it comes from the ground. So the Gemara says that's a good source if what we're celebrating on Sukkot is the ananei hakavod, the clouds in the midbar. But if what we're celebrating on Sukkot was just the fact that they had natural homes, some type of tents or protection that they made, so then you can't bring a source from a pasuk which is talking about a cloud, because the yontif of Sukkot doesn't have to do with anything about the clouds in the midbar. So Elul Rabbi Akiva According to Rabbi Akiva, what's the source of the Mishnah that the definition of Succah needs to come from the ground and can't be mekabel tumah and not able to become impure? Okay, so this machlokus, I don't know if Rabbi Silber touched upon this last night, but this is just a fascinating machlokus about what is the whole essence of the Yontif of Sukkot. Again, the pasuk said, you're celebrating Sukkot, kiba Sukkos hoshafti, because I placed you in Sukkot in the desert. So they're having a disagreement. What does it mean I placed you in Sukkot? Does it mean a reference to the Anania covet, which was this supernatural experience, or does it mean huts? So part of what the Mefarshim talk about is, according to the second opinion, so what was so amazing about the huts? According to the first opinion, the Anania covet, it was like an ace. It was really a miracle. According to the second opinion that it's huts, one of the questions the Mefarshim talk about is, what is it that defines the Yontif of Sukkot as so unbelievable to commemorate? Another interesting thing is the famous question the Torah asks, which is, why is it that Sukkot is in the fall time? If we left Mitzrayim in the spring, which is Pesach time, so why is it that we do Sukkot in the fall time? So one of the things that the Mefarshim touch upon is this disagreement. Is that, does that question have to get into this disagreement? In other words, some say that it's easier to understand according to the opinion that it was huts, because maybe they only needed those huts when it started getting cool outside. So according to that opinion, it would be easier to understand in the fall than in the other opinion. But okay, we'll save the rest for Sukkot time. Okay, says the Gemara, back to what we're talking about. The Mishnah said that the definition of Succah is two things. It needs to grow from the ground and it can't be makabel tumah. So what's the source? So the Gemara tried to say that the pasuk says a cloud comes from the ground, and we know a cloud is not makabel tumah. And if this Yontif of Sukkot is to celebrate the Anani HaKavod, so then that could be my source. That's the definition of Succah. The Gemara said that makes sense according to the opinion that what we're doing on Sukkot is commemorating the Anani HaKavod. But according to the opinion that Sukkot is Sukkot mamish, the huts that they had, so what's your source of the Mishnah for the definition of Succah? So the pasuk says, Chag hasukis taselecha. Makish sukkah lechagiga. That word chag is a reference to the carbon chagiga, which is a carbon that the person brings every yontif. So there's a connection between the carbon of the chagiga and sukkahs. Ma chagiga davar she'ena makabel tumah gedula min haaretz. Just like a carbon chagiga is brought from something which is not makabel tumah, an animal, the gedula min haaretz, and it grows from the ground. So here, right now, we're saying gedula min haaretz means that an animal doesn't grow from the ground, but an animal gets its food from something which grows from the ground, which allows it to grow. So right now, the Gemara is saying that gedula min haaretz, the definition would be not something that physically grows from the ground, but it's sustained from things which grow from the ground. Af sukkah davar she'ena makabel tumah gedula min haaretz. So too, a sukkah needs to be, the schach needs to be with something which cannot become impure, cannot become tamei, and grows from the ground. As the Gemara, imach hagiga, top of Yud Beis. Imach hagiga balei chayim, af sukkah nami balei chayim. If you learn from there, so just like the chagiga, the carbon chagiga is a category of it, something which is alive. So sukkah nami balei chayim, maybe your schach, you should limit it to that type of category of something which is a bal chai, the type of a species, a living type of animal. So if that's your source, it's not really going to come out with the right definition of schach. So Kiyasa Rav and Rav Yochanan are trying a different source for the halach of the Mishnah, that the definition of schach is two things: grows from the ground and can't be makabel tumah. So he said the source is ba'aspecha migarnecha mi'egvecha. The pasuk says you should chagas sukkos tasel chashivas yamim. Person should have the yontif of sukkos for 7 days. Ba'aspecha migarnecha mi'egvecha. B'psolas garin v'yakev akasam medaber. It means from the leftovers, the bad stuff from his goren v'yekev, which is his leftover from his, where he makes his wine and where he makes his grain, so the leftover materials of the stuff that grew from the ground, he's understanding that that's what the pasuk is referencing, that's what you should use for Succah. So those are materials which, number one, grow from the ground, and number two, are not makabel tumah. Ve'ema goren atzmo v'yekev atzmo challenges the Gemara. How do you know that it's the stuff of the grapevine without the food? Maybe it's the grapevine with the food, which is makabel tumah. In other words, how do you know it's the vine itself minus the grape? Maybe it's together with the food, and then if that's the source, it would really mean that it's okay to use things which are makabel tumah. Amr abzeira yekev ksiv kan v'ef shel l'sachech bo. Says Rashi that the word yekev sounds like after it was made into wine, and there's no practical way to put wine on your roof because it's a liquid. It's going to fall through. So therefore, it must be the pasuk was referencing the materials minus the food because it was already made into a liquid, and therefore the source was the grapevine, which is something which grows from the ground that can't be makabel tumah. Maskiv l'Rabbi Yirmiyah ve'ema yayin karush haba mishnir shudom eliguli dvelo. Rabbi Yirmiyah challenged that you can have a type of congealed wine, which became like a certain level of thickness that it would be able to stay up on a roof. So maybe when the pasuk said it, it meant the materials plus something which was made into wine in a way that it's thick enough to stay on the roof. So how do you know that it's the materials without the wine? Zera says, we thought we understood the Mishnah, and Rabbi Yirmiyah came and threw an arrow into it. In other words, challenged, or chopped it down, Rashi says. Chopped it down with an axe. In other words, we thought we understood the reason for the Mishnah until he asked this question, and then we realized we were stuck. So let's try again. Rav Ashi Omar. So again, we're trying to answer, how did the Mishnah know that the definition of Succah is grows from the ground and can't be makabel tumah? Rav Ashi Omar mi garnecha v'lo garan atzmo. And the fact that the pasuk said a mem, mi garnecha, sounds like from stuff from the garin, but not the garin itself, which is the food. Mi yikvecha v'lo yekev atzmo. And where you produce your grains also, and not from the food itself. So in other words, the mem is coming to exclude the best stuff there, which is the food, or the wine. Therefore, the only things which the pasuk is referencing is really the materials. Okay, so that's Rav Ashi's pshat in the Mishnah. So the pasuk by Sukkah at the end talked about the person's in his goren and his yekev, and in that pasuk it said a mem, which was excluding part of the goren and his yekev, which is excluding the better part, which is the food or the wine, and therefore we're left with the materials of the goren and the yekev, which are things which grow from the ground and are not makabel tumah. Chisda said a different source for the Mishnah's halacha, that the pasuk in Nehemiah says, "Tzu'u hahar ve'vio alei zayis va'alei eitz shemen va'alei hadas va'alei tmarim." Then when the pasuk is referencing Sukkahs and it lists materials that a person could use for a sukkah, it lists a whole bunch of things which are not makabel tumah and grow from the ground. So he's saying that by the fact that that was the list of the pasuk, that was how we understood that the pasuk listed an exact examples to tell us this rule that it needs to fit those two criteria of growing from the ground and not be makabel tumah. Ask the Gemara, "V'alei eitz avos hainu hadas hainu eitz avos," that in the pasuk it seems repetitive, that it said hadas and eitz avos, which is a reference to the same type of thing. What we use as hadasim is also called eitz avos. The Gemara is just asking a question on the pasuk, that it seemed to list the same type of branch twice. Rav Chisda hadas shota l'sukkah v'eitz avos lelulav. That if it's a normal hadas, which is kosher for lulav, that's what the pasuk meant when it said eitz avos. If it's the type which is not good for a lulav but is good for a sukkah, in other words, if it's a hadas shota, which means it's not made in the proper way, You'll see that in the third parak, about what exactly the definition of that is, that's the other thing the pasuk is referencing. So it is the same type of tree twice, but the reason the pasuk listed it is because some which are good for sukkah and some which are even good for a lulav. Okay. There's another interesting question to think about that by the Anani HaKavod, Rashi brings in Chumash that the Anani HaKavod surrounded them on all 6 sides, up, down, and all 4 sides. So the Mizrahi asks that if we learn from the Anani HaKavod, then why is it that we don't need kosher schach on our floor and our walls? Right? We know that all the halachas of the schach, which we'll see in a minute, are halachas in the roof. Right? We're going to learn in a minute in the Mishnah that the tefanos, the walls, don't have the halachas of schach. Just an interesting thing, that if the source is the Anani HaKavod, which was really on all 6 sides, it's an interesting thing that the halachas of sukkah are limited to the roof. Okay, so where does the Mishnah say that? The Mishnah says, Chavili kash, chavili eitzim, chavili zradim, which means if you have a bundle of kash, or a bundle of wood, or a bundle of zradin, which Rashi says is types of stalks, reeds, ein mesachechin behen. Person is not allowed to use them as schach. So we'll see in the Gemara why that is. V'kulan shetirin ksheirus. Once a person, meaning it's on his roof and it's in a bundle, so the Mishnah is saying you're not allowed to use it, but if you cut the screen, which means you cut the thing which is holding it all together, then it's okay. And the Mishnah says, kulan ksheirus lidfanas. And all of them are ksheirus lidfanas. So this is a very important Rashi. Take a look at Rashi on the Mishnah. Ksheirus lidfanas. Rashi says, the kulan hapsulim sheshanina bischach. So the Mishnah said all of these are good for the walls. So what's all of these? Rashi says, kulan hapsulim sheshaninu bischach. All the things which were no good by schach are good by tfanas, are good by walls. In other words, Rashi is coming to say that this line, all are good by tfanas, is not just going on this Mishnah which we just read. It's going back on the last 12 days. Right? If you start from Daf Beis, anytime in the Mishnah you had something which is no good by schach, Rashi is saying when it comes to the walls, everything is totally fine. So this is how we paskin, which is why a person can make walls out of material which does not grow from the ground. You can make metal, canvas, right? You can make walls out of any material. Because Rashi is saying that this line of the Mishnah, kulan ksheirus lidfanas, is going back on, there's really no rules when it comes to the walls in terms of what material it's made out of. There are Rishonim here who disagree and learn that this line is just going back on the line before, which would come out if a person's looking for stringencies, would come out at a nice stringency. In other words, you have to make your walls out of all the things which are good for schach. But okay, we paskin that it, like the Rashi's reading it, that it's really going back on everything before. Amr of Yaakov Shamas Minid Rabbi Yochanan Tarti. Yaakov said, I heard from Rabbi Yochanan 2 things. He talked about 2 Mishnahs. Chadaha, one was the Mishnah we just read. V'ida chachotet begadish, lasas lo sukkah ina sukkah. The Mishnah later says, a person has sorry, I'm just blanking on the word. He has a gadish, a heap, a pile of some stalks. And what does he do? He digs out from the bottom. So in other words, he has a big heap here, and he starts digging out from the bottom, and he digs out his inside, and he's left with his roof. Okay, so in other words, he never put schach on, everything was here, and he dug out from the bottom. So that the Mishnah is a chotit begadish lasas lo sukkah ein a sukkah. Person who does that to make a sukkah, it's not a sukkah. So again, our Mishnah was talking about a person who had a pile, a bundle of wood or reeds, and he put it on his sukkah. And the Mishnah said you're not supposed to do it for schach. And there was another Mishnah that said a person who had a heap and he dug out from the bottom, it's not a sukkah. So those were the 2 Mishnahs. Chada mishum gzeiras otzer. And Rabbi Yochanan said one of the Mishnahs is a din d'Rabbanan, is not good mid'Rabbanan. V'chad mishum tasav lo min ha'asi. Tasav lo min ha'asi means that if a person made a sukkah in a way that it's not a good sukkah, and then decided oh, I want to use it for a sukkah. So there's a problem called tasev v'lo min ha'asi, that a person needs to make the sukkah. It can't be decided to turn it into a sukkah in a way that it wasn't made properly. Right? This is a rule which exists other places. For example, a person put on strings on its tzitzis for a totally different reason, and then decided, oh, I want to use it as my tzitzis. There's a problem, tasev v'lo min ha'asi, that when you put on the thing which makes the tzitzis, or when you make the sukkah, you have to do it for the right reason. So again, we have two Mishnahs. We have our Mishnah, which was a person put up a pile of wood tied together, a bundle, onto his roof. We have another Mishnah, which is a person had a heap and he dug out the bottom. Both Mishnah said it's no good. We heard from Rabbi Yochanan, one's a problem midarabbanan, one's a problem midoraisa. V'lo yadana hayminayu mishum otzer hayminayu mishum tasav lo min ha'asi. And Rabbi Yaakov is saying, I remembered Rabbi Yochanan talked about both. I remember he said one's doraisa, one's darabbanan. I just don't remember which one was which. Okay, so this is the problem we're stuck with. We have two Mishnahs. One's a problem midarabbanan, one's a problem midoraisa. Rabbi Yaakov's not sure which one's which. Amr Reb Yirmiyah nichzi anon. Let's try to figure it out. The Amr Reb Chia bar Abba Amr Reb Yochanan mipnei ma Amr chavile kash chavile eitzem chavile zra denei mesachem behen. We have a statement from Rabbi Yochanan himself that what's the reason for our Mishnah that you can't use this bundle of wood tied together for Succah, because pa'amim shadam bamin asada be'erev, because a person worked in the field during the day. So sometimes he would come home, chaviso al aksefo, and he was holding the wood which he just chopped down in the field. Umale menichal sukasa k'dei liyavsha. So the wood was still a little bit wet, so he brings it home, he throws it on top of some type of structure so that it can dry out. V'nim l'chalel l'sikach. Now Sukkah comes and he sees some wood on top of a structure, and he says, oh, I'll use it as schach. But Torah amar tasev v'lo min ha'asi. The Torah says that's no good. So in other words, when a person puts up, you touched upon this a couple days ago, when a person puts up schach, he at least needs to put it up in order to provide shade for himself. Right? L'chatchila, a person puts it up for the mitzvah of Sukkah, but if a person puts it up for tz'l, to produce shade as a shady place for himself, that's okay. This person, when he came home and he put up his wood, why did he put it up? He put it up because it's wet and I want it to dry. So that is totally no good. Right? So he came home, whatever it was in the summertime, and he had his wet wood and he threw it up. And now Sukkot came and he saw, oh, I already have wood on top of a structure. Right? That'll save me some time, Sukkot's time. So he decides, I'll use that. So that is no good midoraisa, because he put up the wood for nothing to do with shade, and now he's deciding to use it as a sukkah. Rabbi Yochanan said, the reason in our Mishnah you're never allowed to use a bundle of wood which is tied together on your roof as a sukkah, even if you put it up for shade, is because we're concerned people are going to get confused between the two cases. In other words, you can have one person who put it up to dry out, which is actually a problem. You can have another person who, the day before Sukkot, went to the store, bought a bundle of wood tied together, and said, this is my schach, I put it up for my sukkah. That person's 100% fine. But it's confusing between the two cases. So to not get confused, the Mishnah told us, adin d'rabbanan, that you're never allowed to use a bundle of wood tied together because we don't want the person to get confused and use even the case which he put up to dry, which is really a problem. So again, we have a statement from Rabbi Yochanan which said, why can't you use a bundle of wood tied together? Because we're concerned the person will then come to use the case which he put it up to dry, which is really not a good sukkah. And if we have a statement from Rabbi Yochanan in our Mishnah stating that it's a din d'rabbanan, that a person is going to get confused about the other case when he put it up to dry, so then the other Mishnah of chotet begadish, the person who's digging out the bottom of the heap, that case must be a problem mid'oraisa. So again, we have two Mishnahs. One Mishnah said a person is digging out the bottom of a heap. Our Mishnah said that a person who put up a bundle of wood which was tied together on top of his sukkah cannot be used for schach. We had a statement from Rabbi Yochanan saying one's a problem midaraisa, one's a problem midarabbanan. We weren't sure which one's which. The Gemara is answering that we had a statement from Rabbi Yochanan in our Mishnah which explained that it's really a din d'Rabbanan, which means even though the person put up his pile of wood tied together for the reason, still the Mishnah is saying it's no good. So why is it no good? Din d'Rabbanan. Midrabbanan it's no good. It's a gzeira. We're concerned that a person's going to get confused with the case where he really put it up for the wrong reason, to dry. He put up, right, he came home with his bundle, threw it up to dry, and then Sukkah's time decided to use it. That case is no good. Because it's confusing, because the two Sukkahs look exactly the same. Chazal were concerned, and therefore they said you're not allowed to use any bundle of wood tied together. And therefore, if we figured out that our Mishnah is a din d'Rabbanan, so that other Mishnah, which was talking about digging out the heap that you have, that Mishnah must just be saying d'oraisa it's no good, which means that they didn't make a din d'Rabbanan on a person who dug out the bottom of the heap and solved the problem, which was he picked up the schach and put it back down. Must be in that case we didn't make a din d'Rabbanan, because our Mishnah is expressing any type of bundle of wood can't be used midrabbanan because of the case where he did it for the wrong reason. The other Mishnah is only saying the din d'oraisa, that a person who dug out the heap and never created the schach was made by itself. He never put down the schach is a problem. But it would sound like if the person took care of the problem over there and picked up the sukkah and put it down, then it's really okay. Okay, so this is a question which the Mefarshim talk about. Why over there did we not make a din d'Rabbanan that a person would get confused? Rashi says that since the person himself just showed us he knows the problem because he picked it up and put it back down, that's why over there we didn't feel the need to make the problem. But okay, we had two Mishnayos. We weren't sure which was the Raisa, which was the Rabbanan, and now we figured it out. And the fact that Reb Yaakov wasn't sure is because he didn't know this statement that was said in the name of Reb Yochanan. But once he heard it, so that was really the answer to his question, which Mishnah was the Raisa, which Mishnah was the Rabbanan. Amar Ravashi, Atu chavili kash vechavili eitim shum gzeres oter ika mishum tasav v'lomena osiv leka. Ravashi says, our Mishnah, which is putting up tied together wood, so that's only a problem midarabanan. You can't have a case which is a problem midaraisa. So the problem midaraisa would be if a person put it up to dry out. He didn't even put it up for schach. Bachotit begadish mishum tasav v'lomena osiv ika. You can only have a problem daraisa if a person dug out that heap and never made the schach mishum gzeres otzer leka. But you can't have a problem midarabanan also. In other words, what Ravashi is challenging is, if we talk about either Mishnah, I could find you a case which is a problem d'oraisa, and I could find you a case which midarabanan, which d'oraisa is okay, but it looks exactly the same, and I think they should make it prohibited midarabanan. So again, in our Mishnah, if a person put up his wet wood to dry out and then decided to use it for schach, that's no good d'oraisa. He didn't put it up for shade. But if a person put it up for shade, d'oraisa, it's really okay. And our Mishnah said, because it's confusing, the two sukkahs look exactly the same. You have a bundle of wood on the sukkah, and one person's no good, one person's good. It's confusing. So therefore, we said, it doesn't matter what you put it up for, you're not allowed to use that type of schach. So Ravashi is saying, let's jump to the other Mishnah. Person dug out the inside of the heap, so that's a problem midaraisa because he never made schach. Right? The heap was put on the ground, and there was nothing for it to provide shade for, because it was one big thick piece. You dug out the bottom, and the schach wasn't put there, the schach was made. So that's a problem d'oraisa. What would be a case which is really okay d'oraisa, but is very confusing? That if a person did that, and then picked up the heap and put it down. So that's really fine. Because why? Because when he picked it up and put it down, he just made the schach. But it's very confusing. You have two people with their sukkahs made out of their heap, and one person's going to be no good d'oraisa, and one person's going to be good d'oraisa. So it's very confusing. They look the same. So Rav Ashi, he's saying, I don't understand. Why in this Mishnah did we make it, or did we understand that the Mishnah was saying a din d'Rabbanan, and over there we said, no, that Mishnah of digging out the heap was only saying d'oraisa, it's a problem, but there was no gzeira midrabbanan. There was no reason to be gozer in the case when the person picked it up and put it down. So Rabbi Yochanan Amar Lacha Hacha Dekatani Mesachem Elechatchilahu De Mesachem Shum Gzeirus Otzer Hadaraisa Shaper Dami. Saying that the fact, if you read the Mishnah over here, Ein Mesachem, you shouldn't do it, sounds like it's only a din d'Rabbanan. Hasam Dekatani Ein a Sukkah. Over there, the Mishnah phrased it as it's not a Sukkah. So it sounds over there that even midaraisa it's not a sukkah. So the answer to the question is, if you want to know how I figured it out, the answer is the Mishnah presented itself differently. Here the Mishnah phrased itself as ein mesachachin bahen, person shouldn't use it as schach. Over there the Mishnah said it's not a sukkah. So why did the Mishnah use different words? To hint to me that over there the problem is a d'oraisa problem. Over here the problem is a d'Rabbanan problem. Okay, so that's how I know that there's a difference between the two Mishnahs. Again, the question was, I could come up with a d'oraisa problem in each case, I could come up with a d'Rabbanan problem in each case. Like, how do you know how to read the two Mishnahs to figure out one's only a problem d'oraisa and one's even a problem d'Rabbanan? The answer is that if you read the Mishnah carefully, it used different words, therefore hinting to me that over here, Chazal made a din d'Rabbanan to prohibit any type of bundles of wood, as opposed to in the case that's really a problem, it's no good. Therefore, I see from the Mishnah there was only a problem if it's really a problem. But in the case which is okay, because he picked up the heap and put it back down, it's really, we didn't make a din d'Rabbanan in that case. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Sachacha b'chitzim scharim ksheira. Okay, so now we're going to go through examples of which things a person could use for schach, which things not. So a person who used schach with chitzim ksheira, with chitzim scharim ksheira, a person who used a type of wood stick, which was used to make an arrow, but a type of wood stick which was used to stick into something else. In other words, it didn't have a hole itself. It was used to stick into something else. Ksheira, because that type of thing cannot be makabel tumah, and therefore it's wood, means it grows from the ground. It's not makabel tumah, you can use it for schach. Benekevas psula. But if it's the type of wood which has a hole, which means there's something that goes into it, which means it's makabel tumah, so then a person cannot use it for schach. Ask the Gemara, scharim ksheira pshita. What's the chiddush? What are you teaching me by saying a piece of wood which grows from the ground and can't be makabel tumah I can use for schach? Like, well, why would I have thought otherwise? Person would have thought that you have two types of wood sticks which were both made to make arrows, and one didn't have a hole, and one did have a hole. You would have thought that even though one is okay, we should say that all those types of materials should not be used because it's confusing between the two types. He's coming to teach you that no, that since it was okay, Chazal didn't feel that people were going to get confused between those types of wood. Benekevas psula, the Gemara's Benekevas psula pshita. Asked the Gemara that the type of wood which was used to make an arrow, which had a hole in it to accept the metal piece of the arrow that went at the tip. So that type of thing's makabel tumah. So what were you coming to teach me? What was your chiddush to come to teach me? I can't use that for schach. Mahu de tema beis bayis kibol ha'osila malos lo shmi kibol kamash malon. You would have said that the type of hole that it has, which is made to fill it up and never becomes separated, in other words, it's a piece of wood with a little hole at the tip, which is made to stick the metal piece of the arrow into it and stay there forever, maybe that's not called a base kibul. That's not defined as something which can accept something, because it was made to put it in and keep it there forever. In other words, a normal kli, a cup, right? You fill it up, you pour it out. Over here, the whole purpose of the filling it up was to fill it up and be closed. So maybe that wouldn't be defined as a base kibul, and it wouldn't be makabel tumah. Can we teach you? No, that it is makabel tumah, and therefore you cannot use it for schach. So his first halacha was saying that the scharim, the ones which are not makabel tumah, it's okay. Don't think that we were gozer, we made a decree, so you don't get confused between the two. And the second halacha was really a halacha in the halachas of tumah, saying the type of arrow which has a hole is makabel tumah, even though the hole is something which permanently gets filled up, and therefore you're not allowed to use it for schach. Amar Rabba bar Rachanan Rav Yochanan, Succah banitze pishton psula. Person who used schach with the production of pishton, flax, which is at a certain point of its production, which we'll see a little bit more in a second, is no good. Behutzni pishton ksheira. Whatever is called hutzni, we'll see the Gemara is going to not be sure what hutzni is, but hutzni pishton, a very early stage of its development of pishton is okay. So in other words, anitze pishton is something towards the end of the process of producing the flax. Hutzni is the very beginning of the production of the flax. That's kosher. Hushni pishton, which is the middle of the two, einu yodea mahu. He's not sure if the halacha of hushni is okay or not okay. But hushni atzman einu yodea. And I'm not even sure how exactly to define what hushni is. Okay, so we know the earliest stage, which is hutzni, is okay. The latest stage, which is anitze pishton, is not okay. The middle stage, he doesn't know if it's okay or if it's not okay, and he's not even sure how to define what's called the middle stage, which the Gemara explains. Manavshach idaik v'lo nafitz hushni karilei. So the three steps of the production was number one, soaking, number two, some type of smashing it, and number three, combing it. Okay, so we have to figure out what is that middle category. Idayik v'lo nafitz hushni karilei. If a person did dayik, which means he smashed it, which means he got to stage number two, if that's called hushni, if that's called the middle category, aval tari v'lo dayik hutzni karilei. But the first category, which was okay, would mean it's okay even though you did the first step of development, which was soaking. Or maybe once you did the soaking, that's already the middle category, and the first category was before any of the three steps of production. So again, the first step, which is hutzni, is okay. The Gemara is saying we're not sure. Is hutzni before you did any of the three steps of production? Or is it even include if you did the first step, which is the soaking? The next question, which is, what's the halach of hushni? So number one, we're not sure what's hushni. Is hushni, even though you after soaking's already called hushni? Or is hushni only once you got to the next step of the production, which is the smushing it? So now it's one question, and he's not sure whatever's called hushni, is it okay or it's not okay? Okay, but what's the name of the problem with, let's say, anitze pishton? Right? He said when you got to the end of the development, it's for sure not okay. So why is it not okay? So Rashi said, because at that point it's able to become tamei, and therefore it doesn't fit the rule of the Mishnah, which is you can only use for schach something which can't become tamei. Okay, over here there's a fascinating Rambam. Can a person use paper for schach? All right, so paper grows, assuming nothing changed since the last time I researched this. Right, paper grows from trees. It's made from trees. Huh? Processed from trees. Okay, so trees is something which is good for schach. So is there any problem with using paper as schach? Anybody? We have 5 more minutes. Huh? Yes, why? Doesn't seem right. Okay. It's processed. So you're saying what? They put other materials into it? Okay, so meaning it depends what the name of the problem the Gemara just said. In other words, Rashi said the problem here is something specific by the flax, that it got to the certain point of being able to be makabel tumah. So if I would tell you that paper can't be makabel tumah, which is a discussion, but let's say I would assume paper can't be makabel tumah. So then it grows from the ground, it can't be makabel tumah. So what should be the name of the problem? What'd you say? So therefore, okay, so the Rambam over here learns the Gemara differently. The Rambam over here learns the Gemara not like Rashi, and learns that the name of the problem with these things is that if it doesn't look like the thing the way it grew, it's processed. But the name of the problem is if it doesn't look like the way it grew, it cannot be used for schach mid'Rabbanan. So according to the Rambam, it should be a problem because paper doesn't look like a tree. Okay, but there are some who say that if you learn the Gemara like some of the other Rishonim, I think Rashi would be one of them, so then you really don't see there's any such requirement in schach. And then it should come out that if you hold paper is not makabel tumah, a person could technically use paper for schach. So in other words, if you learn this Gemara saying a specific problem in these types of materials, so then there should be no problem with using paper as schach, assuming paper is not makabel tumah. The Rambam who learned this Gemara saying that there's a new problem called you can't use for schach something which looks different from the way it grew. So that's a much broader issue. So the Rambam should come out that a person could not use paper as schach because of that new problem. Okay, let's see one more line. Amar of Yehuda, Hani Shushi v'Shvatzri Mesachachin Bahu. These types of things, which are types of vegetables, a person could use them as schach. Why? Because they're not makabel tumah, because it's not something which people eat. Abayi Omer b'shushi mesachachin, b'shvatz v'lo mesachachin. The second ones you should not use. My taima keva the sari rechayu shavik lahu v'nafik. Abayi is saying because when they rot, they become very smelly. So I'm concerned that a person is not going to want to enjoy being in a sukkah because there's a bad smell, and therefore mid'Rabbanan, a person is not allowed to use it as schach in order to avoid that problem. Just for the sponsors of the day, Talmud Torah is Dr. Max and Brenda Lapkovsky in honor of Yitzhak Meir's upcoming Bar Mitzva, and Riva Mitzner in commemoration of the first yartzheit of her father, Larry Schneck, Aryeh ben Chaim zt'l. The morning halacha shir, which takes place after davening, is starting a new topic today. Anybody who's interested in joining, we're starting some of the halachas of Rosh Hashanah now that we are on our way to the Yom Noraim. Good morning.